A lone figure appeared in a field of nothing, shrouded in a black robe. The figure remained for nearly a second, curiously observing the void around him, before a closed door popped into existence, somewhat in front of him and relatively nearby. He paused for another second, feeling other pieces of himself continue his work, and decided to proceed towards the only thing he could. As he approached the door, it resolved itself into something resembling an entrance to what might have been an average tavern a long time ago, in a place that was physically real. He pulled his robe tighter around himself and opened the door. The other side of the door seemed to continue its motif. Once upon a time, places like these were his favorite to quietly observe, always vibrant with the signs of life. And this tavern was no different, though it didn't resemble any life that he had seen before. The place was packed with beings, so varied and different that even he would struggle to describe them all. He could pick out the personalities, though. The fighters at the far end, the romantics in the middle, mixed with the tired. That last group was his favorite, sometimes. The melancholic, here at the close end of the bar. How fitting. He took a seat at the close end of the bar, waiting for the bartender to amble over. A portly being, with too many eyes and what appeared to be antennas sticking out of a wrinkled bald head, covered in blue skin. Outside of those features, the bartender could almost be human from what he could see. Had all the right number of limbs and digits, at least. Off his feet, the figure took a moment to properly survey the bar. He looked over to the fighters first, just in case. All sorts of beings were represented, in every shape, size, and color. Some currently fighting, some that just have the air about them. He could even see a few figures slumped over tables or limp on the floor, unconscious or recovering. Not dead, he hoped. His attention wandered over to the romantics, those who frequent places like this to find solace in the company of others. It used to be hard for him to observe those types, far too easy to remember far too much. These, though, seemed different. Their actions were all the same, and the new looks didn't really bother him. No, there was something else. Something inherently wrong, or perhaps perverse, about the beings in this bar seeking company with each other. He lets his gaze continue onward. Mystical things like this place tended to explain themselves sooner, rather than later. Next were the tired. A little mixing with the romantics along the edge, probably just to feel something again. Old codgers, the beaten down, unfortunate circumstances, walking bad luck. It wasn't so long ago that he might have placed himself in that group. The air about them was familiar enough. A different time, a different place, a real place. He turned to the group he had sat nearby. The melanchol, "What's your poison?" The blue bartender interrupted his thoughts. Damn, he liked having time to be introspective too. He turned his head to the bartender, reaching a pair of spindly calcium hands up to lower his black hood, revealing a bleached human skull with eye sockets full of shadow. He looked up at the bartender, tilting his skull to the side. It never hurt to observe. "You must be new here, pal. I don't recognize you. Do you drink anything?" The words seemed to be accompanied by the approximation of a knowing grin. The bartender's mouth and face were all wrong, moving in strange ways, and yet he could understand his speech and the nuances of his expressions. Curious. "Water, I suppose?" The figure listened to his bare teeth clacking together, somehow forming into words. It had been a long time since he talked to a person like this. "What is this place?" "Jarring, isn't it? We're all shown this place when our charges break free of their little hometowns." The being set a coaster on the bar in front of him, having resolved itself into a familiar wood at some point, and set a glass full of water on top of it. "It always takes a bit for the place to fully form itself to the senses of new guests. You can likely only hear me now, but once you get more accustomed, you'll hear the whole cacophony. Visual details should be coming through soon, though. He had been too preoccupied observing the patrons before, but now that he focused on the bar itself, he could almost see an expanding circle of details, defining themselves, moving slowly outward from his seat. Sounds and seemingly smells following closely behind. What do you mean, we? Haven't you noticed? Every being in this place is just like you. Everyone here is death. At his lack of a reaction, the bartender became a bit more subdued. That usually gets a good reaction from the new ones. Death gave his best sympathetic look. Sorry, hard to be very expressive with a face like mine. As I'm sure you can see, each of us represents a different species. Like I said, deaths arrive when their charges officially leave their origin world for the first time. Though I have been working to restrict the initial summoning until after charges achieve FTL, so there aren't any more unfortunate introductions. Ah, so that was the strange stretching sensation he had felt before he appeared in the void outside. His humans have broken the laws of physics. Again. Unfortunate introductions? Yeah, some of the more active deaths can be fanatical. He motioned to the fighter end of the bar, with his version of a chin. More than one charge was lost and their death erased when they showed up here, just because their charges had made a single colony on the planet in their home solar system. It's better to allow the charges to have a chance of survival. Death reached out his bony fingers, bringing the glass of water towards his mouth. It had been a long time since he was able to consume anything physical, and in a place like this, why shouldn't it work? To his pleasure, he actually was able to drink his water, and it actually felt like liquid was running down his non-existent throat. He had to stop himself from quickly downing the whole glass. Why is this place here? Why are we here? What is here? Heh, worried about your charges. Now that you know about the bar, you can come and go as you need to remove them. To answer your questions... The bartender held up a hand, extending a finger for each point. Why the bar is here and why we are here is the same story, and one too long to tell. Here, on the other hand, is easy. The bar resides in the between. Usually unnoticed by deaths as we cross through it in less than a step, while we haul charges to the other side, but I carved out a pocket of it for this place. Entirely exclusive to deaths. I see. Death sat, letting the bartender wander away while he mulled over the conversation. He could ask about the long story. Time was no object, after all, especially here. He reached forward and grabbed his glass of water again, this time draining the glass. Rotating the empty glass in his hands, he watched the couple of drops in the bottom roll along behind his manipulations, catching the light at exquisite angles. Water truly is magnificent, a potent source of life. That's a dangerous train of thought, and one he doesn't have the energy to ride right now. Instead, he raises his head, noticing that the bar was fully defined by now, and that it was quite loud, if he thought about it. Most of the racket originated from the other end of the bar, where the fighters were concentrated, with some rather disgusting noises drifting from the group of romantics that he'd rather tune out. You must have been burdened with a bad set of charges to sit on this end of the bar for your first visit. Once again, his musings were interrupted, this time by one of the patrons he considered in the melancholic group. This death, he corrected, was quite short, maybe rising to his mid-femur were they both standing, and covered in a pallid grey fur. The fur seemed thin and wiry, and almost falling out in places. The bartender mentioned charges, too. What are they, and what makes you say that? The new death would be short death for the time being, he decided. Simplistic, but sufficient. Short Death grimaced when he mentioned the bartender and charges, before giving him a dubious look. Charges? You know, the things your being is predicated upon, that you are forced to shove to the other side for all of their and your existence. Death gave his best look of understanding and motion for Short Death to continue. Most every new deaf that walks through that door goes right to the other end of the bar, drawn to the energy, eager to prove themselves. I was the former way back when." Short Deaf flashed him a wicked smile, missing more than one tooth. "Every deaf that comes through the door for the first time tries to find where they are their charges fall in the grand scheme. Unless they know their charges are invalid or weak." Short Deaf gave him a pointed look. "New devs coming to this end of the bar tend to put a target on their own back." Deaf gave him a nod. "Makes sense, I suppose. I wouldn't exactly call my humans invalid or weak, though. This end of the bar just felt better to me." He watched Short Deaf's eyes focus on something behind him, before he hopped off his raised stool. "Yeah, well, you better hope they aren't. You've already got incoming." Deaf watched Short Deaf move away, carrying his drink, before something grabbed the back of his spine and robe. "Hey there, new guy. What's up?" Deaf turned, taking a look at the speaker. This Deaf was big, his height and nearly half again, complete with the musculature to fill out his frame. Deaf quickly dubbed him Big Death, taking note of his forearms, tree-trunk legs, and fleshy mandibles extending from his mouth full of sharp teeth. Big Death shoved him forward as he sat down, pinning Deaf against the bar as he claimed the seat Short Deaf had vacated. Deaf felt his skull bounce off of the solid bar, making sure to move his empty glass out of the way so it didn't get crushed. "What are you supposed to be?" Big Deaf growled. Deaf dully felt the bigger being trying to tighten his grip on his spine through his robe. "I'm Death." He didn't like bullies. Bullies made him feel things, and feelings made him remember. Maybe a joke to ease the tension. Big Deaf didn't seem to appreciate his answer. He growled and stood back up, lifting Deaf in the air by the spine in the process. "Funny guy. You want me to hunt down every one of your charges? It wouldn't be hard. My charges are experts at removing opposing deaths." Deaf dangled in the air, considering his options. He really didn't want Big Deaf to use his form to wreck the bar. Not in his first day here. Not anymore, really. Can you put me down? There's no need to fight. Death felt Big Death's grip slacken slightly before he let out a guffaw. "No need to fight. Are you defective? We're deaths. Fighting, killing, and erasing is our entire existence." Big Death wound up a punch, his large fist hurtling straight into Death's skull. Death felt the monumental impact to his face, like a slab of concrete. At least, that's what he was expecting. In reality, or in between, maybe, it was more like a soft pillow lightly slapping his face. He still flew backwards, Big Death's fist carrying enough momentum to send him through the air, but he was able to lightly land on his feet, robe billowing around him. How majestic. Death lifted his skull, searching for another blow from Big Death, but was surprised to see him still standing in place. He seemed to be cradling the fist that he had used to attack Death. Death stood up straighter, still watching Big Death. "I told you, I'd rather not fight." Big Death looked as though he wanted to say many things. He also looked like he was trying to hide how much pain his hand was in. Death relaxed, seeing Big Death wasn't going to charge him. It's a big bar and a bigger universe. Plenty of space, right? Death watched Big Death's eyes wander behind him, and the vicious smirk spread across his face. Death felt a familiar sort of irritation bubble within his chest. Twice in one day. One interaction, really. Big Death spoke up, pain coloring his voice. "Still gotta prove yourself, new guy. There's a lot of deaths in the universe." Death turned around. He'd roll his eyes if he could. Not the first time he wished he had eyes just for that precise purpose. Nearly half of the deaths on the fighting end of the bar had crowded behind him. Big Def's blow sending him straight to that end of the bar. Lots of sizes, colours, and limb configurations. Too many to give effort on designated monikers for each. The crowd, the fighters, too nondescript. He'd have to consider it more later. He turned his skull towards the bar, seeking out the bartender. Blue Death, perhaps? His sockets located the being, hovering near the romantics but keeping an eye on the crowd. Death read enough from the look on his face. Resignment, pity, the slight fog of memories. No help from Blue Death. He'd have to figure out how he can help fix the bar with Blue Death afterwards, then. Oh well. Death reached inward, borrowing some power from his other pieces. His hand grew heavy with the weight of his name, and an old farm tool materialized out of coalescing shadows. His scythe, his reaper, embracing him like an old friend, a light in his darkening world. He watched the shadows bleed from the scythe, now fully formed in his hands, and warm around his shoulders, embracing him like an old lover. Like before, when... He mentally blinked, yanking himself from his sea of thoughts before he got lost. Death raised his head, his eye sockets back in the present, and noticed that the whole bar of Death was looking at him now. The crowd had even taken a step back from him. He looked over to Blue Death, but only saw an inscrutable look on his face this time. Sorry, are we not allowed weapons? No one deigned to answer him, but the crowd backed down, moving with Big Death further into the fighter's corner, much quieter than before. With the scent of an impending fight waning, the rest of the bar somewhat turned back to their previous activities, many still keeping at least one eye on Death. Death released the scythe with a sigh, letting his pieces return to their work. He felt the shadows slough off of him like mud, before melting into the floor. He saw Blue Death waiting near his original seat, reminiscent of a stern father. In trouble with the bartender on the first day. Damn. Inside, he felt the raging sea of memories crashing against his crafted barriers, the smallest bit crashing through. He missed life. Double damn.